Hello, everyone, and thank you for welcoming and joining us today for the international screening of this wonderful documentary made by Ramiro Sebastián Funes. We'll be here to really learn and discuss the revolutionary process that is taken on in Nicaragua following not only the Sandinista Revolution in the 80s, but also seeing the scientific continuation of that as the nation and its people are continuing to fight and combat US sanctions and US imperialism. It is an honor to be here. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Aminta Sea. I am a Nicaraguan American sociologist based out of New Orleans, and myself, including some of the other panelists here joining us today, we were on a delegation this past March in Nicaragua. And so this documentary does a great job and we'll really be discussing a lot of the different things that we have learned throughout this delegation. So thank you everyone for joining us. We will be waiting around 2 to 3 minutes, but in the meantime, we will be live streaming through the Friends of the ATC Facebook page. And I encourage everyone joining us today to please share and distribute, especially as Nicaragua and its people are currently combating the Renacer sanctions bill that is currently being attempted to be passed through the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So we really need to keep up our work and ensure that everyone is being involved because all of our attention right now really should be here in paying attention to what's happening in Nicaragua. I'd also like to mention for our viewers that we do have a Spanish translation available. So this documentary is both in Spanish and English, it's bilingual, but for those of us that are speaking, including myself and the panelists, there is translation available. So as Nicaragua is currently combating this aggression imposed by the US government, we hope that this documentary really highlights the different modes of resistance and struggle in Nicaragua. And we hope that for those of us in the United States, we can take a lot of different lessons. And we are joined by our two panelists today, Yamir Chabur and Margaret Flowers, who will be later discussing some of their lessons that were learned throughout the delegation and the various intricacies of the revolutionary process in Nicaragua, how that's been able to be further manifested and transformed as the material conditions in the country obviously change. There's a lot of different impacts that are impacting the Nicaraguan people alongside not only with sanctions, but also with the impacts of climate change. So we'll be really seeing the successes of building food sovereignty through the revolutionary processes of the ATC. And so I would like to pass it off to Erika Taquiao. Erika Taquiao is part of the ATC's International Relations Secretariat and the Friends of the ATC Coordinator. She is also part of the CLOC, Via Campesina's Continental Operating Secretariat, and she will be discussing in further detail of the different events and things that we were engaging in the current, or excuse me, in the past delegation this March.
Great. Amita, thank you so much for this introduction to today's very, very exciting event, launching Nicaragua Against Empire, this very beautiful documentary that's been worked on by our comrade Ramiro. Like Aminta said, my name's Erika Taquiao. I work here in the ATC, Asociación de Trabajadores del Campo, in the International Relations Secretariat based out of Managua, Nicaragua, and I coordinate the Friends of the ATC Solidarity Network. Just to talk a little bit about the delegation, out of which a lot of the content that you'll see came out of. This delegation really had the goal of understanding the current reality of Nicaragua, how sanctions and more broadly how US imperialism affect this country but also just importantly, how the Nicaraguan people continue to defend their sovereignty and improve the quality of life of their people, thanks to the Sandinista Popular Revolution, as well as the wide number of popular organizations that organize here. The delegation itself was organized by a few different key organizations. So first and foremost, we've been saying the ATC, Asociación de Trabajadores del Campo, stands for Rural Workers Association, which today represents about 50,000 Nicaraguan farm workers and small farmers. This organization was born in the 1970s during the period of the insurrection to overthrow the US-backed Somoza dictatorship. Then in the 1980s, played a leading role in organizing the agrarian reform, which redistributed about half of the country's arable land into the hand of formerly landless peasants. And in the 1990s, played a very important role in helping to found an international peasant movement called La Vía Campesina, which coined the concept of food sovereignty. The other two organizations involved in the delegation, Friends of the ATC, which is the solidarity network with the ATC, made up mostly of North Americans and lots of young folks who are looking to organize solidarity with the organization, also with the international peasant movement, La Vía Campesina, and of course with the Sandinista Revolution. And the third organization that played a very, very important role in this delegation is the Sanctions Kill Coalition, which is a coalition of dozens and dozens of organizations, mostly North American organizations, who organize against illegal US sanctions that are applied against about 35 countries around the world. So our delegation that took place in March of this year was made up of 13 North Americans and was divided into three main parts, which you're going to see reflected also in Ramiro's documentary. In the first part of the delegation, the focus was really on getting an introduction into Nicaragua and understanding the current context. The delegation visited a number of historic sites, including the Plaza de Revolución, which you'll see at the start of the film. There were also a number of important presentations made, including about the 2018 failed coup attempt, the history of US intervention in Nicaragua, and about the organizations involved in this delegation, including the ATC and La Vía Campesina. We also heard a very, very important presentation from Dr. Paul Oquist, representative of the Nicaraguan government, who tragically passed away a few weeks after we met him. Dr. Oquist, may you rest in power. In the second part of the delegation divided up into two small groups to travel to two rural communities, one in Estelí, the Department of Estelí, another in the Department of Jinotega. Those are both northern departments in the country of Nicaragua. And the delegates stayed with families that are made up of kind of represent the base of the ATC in order to organize how the ATC organizes in rural areas, and also how the revolution has worked to improve the lives of people in rural areas, especially small farmers. And that's where the delegates really saw food sovereignty in action. So the importance of how a country that grows its own food really has a pillar in place that is a fundamental part of constructing true national and popular sovereignty. Then in the third part of this delegation, we got on a plane and flew to the autonomous Caribbean coast region, specifically to Bilwi. And there, the delegation looked at a few different areas. First of all, how the revolution has continued or worked to construct a multi-ethnic, plurinational country that really respects the rights of indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples. We also studied the conflict beef issue, which is a media story that came out last year in attempts to manipulate information about what's happening in Nicaragua. And third, the delegation also got to see with their own eyes how this region is recovering from a very obvious effect of climate change, which was the passage of hurricanes Eta and Iota in November of last year. So out of this really beautiful exchange, delegation came many different pieces, including this documentary, which we're going to see after the panel. And I want to conclude by thanking all of the delegates for all of their hard work to share this information with others, continue everyone that's watching us either on Zoom or on our live stream on the Friends of the ATC Facebook page to really share the information that came out of the delegation, especially share the documentary, because there's a lot of work to do to continue to fight US intervention, especially with the Renacer Act, like Amita said. So thank you everyone for being here, and enjoy the documentary.
Thank you so much, Erika, for that fabulous introduction with respects to the different activities and lessons that we had during the delegation. It's very true, just really how all-encompassing the delegation was, really noting the different modes of resistance that are being taken place right now in Nicaragua. And it's very exciting because there's just really so much to learn and observe. Next up, I would like to introduce one of our panelists, Yamir Chabur. Yamir Chabur is a Colombian-American organizer and political analyst based out of New York City, and he previously attended the most recent Friends of the ATC and Sanctions Kill delegation. So thank you so much, Yamir. I'll pass it on to you.
Hey, Amita. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here to talk about my experience in Nicaragua on our delegation. I would like to start with the fact that it was such a beautiful experience going to Nicaragua, participating in this delegation, and learning about Nicaragua's revolutionary process from present day to its past, its history. Nicaragua is a country that has resisted U.S. intervention going back all the way to the 1800s with a Confederate mercenary by the name of William Walker who invaded Nicaragua, and you had the Nicaraguans and all of Central America that were able to expel this person, going to Sandino, who expelled the Marines in the 1900s. Then you have the triumph of the Sandinista Popular Revolution, which overthrows a U.S.-backed dictator, Somoza, the Contra Wars, just going through the whole history and learning about how present-day Nicaraguans, from its youth to its elders, consolidate and represent that history of resistance. And it's shown in their national pride, it's shown in their food sovereignty, which we will be talking about a lot within this documentary. Learning a lot about its food sovereignty, Nicaragua's food sovereignty, it made me understand about how a country cannot have political sovereignty if it doesn't have food sovereignty, because the people who control your food, where your people get, how your people eat, control you and your life and your nation. That's why I love the fact that Nicaragua has a strong food sovereignty system, which doesn't affect them as much with the sanctions when it comes to food importation. But going through Nicaragua, going through the rural communities of Jinotega, going to the Caribbean coast of Puerto Cabezas. In part, we went to the beautiful island of Corn Island, but still, I got to see a cultural experience of Nicaragua and the diversity in Nicaragua nationalism. So, it was beautiful spending time with the Afro-Indigenous Mosquito tribes. Nicaragua left an imprint in me. It left me with a lot of inspiration, made me understand why Nicaragua is part of the troika of resistance. To the empire, it's the troika of tyranny, and we all know why it's a tyranny for U.S. imperialism, for U.S. interests, is because Nicaragua shows a different model. It shows that another world is possible once the people have control of their resources, once there's a political project which decolonizes and empowers its population. And Nicaragua is an inspiration to all peoples who are fighting for self-determination and who are fighting for liberation. As we can see right now, where my family comes from in Colombia, how there's a massive uprising. I have right now been very a part of organizing here in New York City with the Colombian diaspora in solidarity with our uprising. And that is because the people over there do not have the same rights or the same project as Nicaragua has it. And that demonstrates the power of the Sandinista Revolution for the oppressed to take control of their destiny and to take their humanity back. So Nicaragua is an inspiration to people out in Colombia or out in Palestine as well. So thank you for having me on this panel discussion. I can't wait to see this documentary. I have not seen this documentary. Shout outs to my brother, my comrade, Ramiro, for making this documentary. and long live the Sandinista Popular Revolution.
Thank you so much, Yamir, for your commentary. It really has been so incredible to see the different ways in which Nicaragua, both its government and its people, have been able to curate revolution and have been able to really combat so much US-based aggression, and really seeing the ways in which that revolutionary process has been really malleable in a really positive way, and really seeing how it continues to grow stronger, especially for those of us on the anti-imperialist left that are also obviously trying to foster internationalism. There's a lot of wonderful and incredible lessons like those that you mentioned, Yamir, to really take away and learn from Nicaragua. Next up, I would like to introduce Margaret Flowers as our next panelist. Margaret Flowers is the Director of Popular Resistance and the host of Clearing the Fog Radio, and she is an organizer with the Sanctions Kill campaign. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Aminta, and it's wonderful to see everyone this evening. Thank you to those of you that are here tonight. So I wanted to kind of build on some of the lessons that we learned during our delegation to Nicaragua. And for me, in addition to kind of seeing how things were in the country and getting to see a large part of the country, I really wanted to learn about how they accomplished the revolution and how they continued to manifest the revolution. And so there were some very important lessons to take away from Nicaragua, and so much more to learn, going forward. But I think some particular points are that Nicaraguans both formed a political entity, the Sandinista Front, which, in the 1970s, which provided a political platform, something to aspire to, but at the same time was the organizing of the ATC, the Rural Workers Association. And so creating this complementary worker-based organization throughout the country, was really pivotal. And there was a lot, of course, of collaboration and, people from the ATC who were part of the Sandinista Revolution, the fight, particularly after 1979, when the US waged the Contra War to punish Nicaragua for daring to be independent from US imperialism. There was a lot of collaboration between the peasant workers and the people in the Sandinista Front. So this was really critical. It's critical to have both political power and participation of the people, because you need the political power to be able to have the resources to put your program into place, but you also need the participation of the people to actually, put that program into place, to physically put it into place. And that's what we saw in Nicaragua. Somebody asked about the economy there, and there's a lot of work being done. It's very much a small enterprise-based economy, and also a lot of cooperatives as well. So it's really, a more democratic type of economy in Nicaragua. And of course, it's evolving, as they continue to build and grow the revolution there. Also really important that there's empowerment of women and youth, and a conscious effort to include women in leadership, to educate women and provide skills to people, as well as to educate youth and provide them the skills to be leaders in their communities and future leaders. Really important. Yamir talked about the food sovereignty, and of course that's critical, but there's also been work done to build the basic infrastructure that the country needs so that all people are empowered, so all people have access to energy, they have access to roads, they can get their products to the market, that there are health centers in every community, there are schools in every community, and education is free, even up to the university level. There's a lot of emphasis on education throughout Nicaragua. So these things are also key, so that people have the skills they need to further and build the revolution and to defend it, which was really critical during the Contra time, but then also during the neoliberal period prior to Daniel Ortega being brought back into, voted back into power in 2006. There was 16 years from 1990 to 2006 of this neoliberal leadership, but the revolution didn't stop. They continued to try to defend the gains and put in place the programs that they wanted to create. I think also really important, the reconciliation process that happened after the Contra War. So in communities, you now have people who fought on the Contra side and Sandinistas working together in the fields and building these cooperatives. And so really strengthening the revolution in that way. Also, the efforts to build a multicultural society, as we learned, particularly when we went to the autonomous zone on the Caribbean coast. And I urge people to learn more about that and the work that has been done, the model of negotiating with the indigenous and Afro-Nicaraguan communities so that they could work out, agreements and respect the sovereignty of those peoples and, I guess, well, however you would say it, to kind of try to correct what had been, happening with the kind of the history of slavery and the Afro descendants there. I think that it's really important. At the school in Managua, the ATC's Friends of the ATC school, there was a slogan up on one of the buildings, on the education building, and it said, globalize the struggle, globalize the fight. And Nicaraguans recognize the importance of that as well. And so really did found La Via Campesina, a worldwide rural workers movement that's anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchal. And so this international solidarity, this international collaboration, learning from each other is really critical. And I urge each of you, sorry, I put my timer on so that I wouldn't run over. I urge everyone, if you can get the opportunity to go to Nicaragua, to see for yourself, to meet people, it's critical. It's really life-changing once you experience it for yourself and develop those relationships. So I really encourage people to look for further delegations. And I also look forward to seeing the documentary tonight. I've not seen it either. So thank you for including me this evening.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for your takeaway lessons and sharing with us. Really, there is just so much to learn about Nicaragua's revolutionary process. And it is really incredible to note from, building food sovereignty to successfully dealing with the COVID pandemic. Nicaragua has really, because of their free universal healthcare programs, people have been able to stay healthy and really been able to combat this pandemic amidst all of the different challenges that come with a nation being sanctioned. And at the same time, really fostering and building international solidarity with the means of having the opportunity for workers of all different kinds to learn and grow alongside and with each other. Next up, I would like to just mention very briefly with respects to being able to access the translation. The Spanish translation is available by clicking this interpretation button and clicking Spanish. So for those that are interested and need the translation, that is available there. I would like to now pass it on to Ramiro, the creator of this incredible documentary. Ramiro Sebastián Funes is a Honduran communist content creator based in Los Angeles, California, and he will briefly talk a little bit about the documentary. So thank you.
Good evening, sisters, brothers, people watching this in Nicaragua, Costa Rica, the United States, Canada, wherever you're watching this. I appreciate you for joining this very important discussion, meeting, and presentation of the film, Nicaragua Against Empire. This is my gift of solidarity, of support for my sisters and brothers in Nicaragua with the Sandinista Revolution. For me as a Honduran, as the child of Honduran immigrants, as the son of a working class mother who worked hard to raise me, traveling to Nicaragua and seeing the accomplishments of a woman-led revolution has been very inspiring and very beautiful. We're talking about one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere that up until recently was one of the most impoverished in the region, that has been able to lift itself up with dignity, with respect against the empire. And that's why I think the flyer that was used to promote this event is very beautiful, because it shows the hero, our hero, Sandino, Augusto Cesar Sandino, an indigenous campesino from Nicaragua, working class, humble roots, standing up against the empire, standing up against Uncle Sam and the arrogance and the chauvinism of US imperialism. Fundamentally, what this film is about is much broader than Nicaragua. Although Nicaragua is obviously the inspiration, the location, the setting, the example of what we're talking about, the film is ultimately touching on something bigger. And that is the systemic crisis of capitalism and imperialism, and the path that socialism, constructive 21st century socialism, shows us in this modern crisis during COVID-19. In countries around the world, including the United States, including where my family is from, Honduras, including Colombia, where compañero Yamir's family is from, including occupied Palestine, where the Israeli Zionists are continuing to kill, bomb, destroy innocent families and lives. The system is ruled by the free market. The system is ruled by capitalism, by profits, by money, by greed, by individualism, by this idea that power should be glorified above all else, that wealth should be glorified above all else. And Nicaragua shows an example of what the alternative is. In the capitalist, imperialist, and neoliberal countries, we see systemic racism, Black and brown people being locked up in jails and prisons, indigenous people being kicked off of their lands. We see systemic racism, we see poverty, we see moms being separated from their children, we see people being locked up in jails, endless wars around the world, drug gangs, violence, chaos, poverty, destruction. This is what capitalism and imperialism brings, and the model of neoliberalism that we see around us today crumbling. Nicaragua, which is affirmative in its construction of socialism with Nicaraguan characteristics, with Sandinismo, with indigenous and Afro-indigenous features, with some elements of Catholicism, catered to the Nicaraguan people. They're lifting themselves up. They're rejecting the free market neoliberal system that has brought us to utter destruction and chaos around the world. And here's a small, tiny country, historically one of the most poorest in Latin America, the poorest of the poor, right, in Latin America and the Caribbean, that is showing the example, showing the way out. In Nicaragua, they have food sovereignty. Over 85% of the food that is eaten in Nicaragua is produced locally, fresh, healthy food, not McDonald's, not Burger King, not fast food junk and poison that's literally killing our bodies and our minds and our spirits. Women don't have to walk around in fear of being violated, of being persecuted. Black and indigenous people have the dignity and the power of their own communities and region to learn about themselves, to empower themselves, to grow alongside the Sandinista Revolution. And above all else, and this is something that one of the compañeros mentions in the documentary, which is their most prized possession, which is peace. Nicaragua is one of the most peaceful countries in not only Central America, but in Latin America. It has one of the lowest homicide rates in the world. And compare this to Honduras, which is right next door, which is run as a colony of the United States, where there's violence, chaos, COVID-19 deaths, femicides, Black and indigenous people being kicked out of their lands. And this is the case in many countries across our planet. And Nicaragua is showing the way out. They're showing the example of what a new system looks like, a new socialist system, apart from Wall Street, apart from Washington, that is not subservient to the interests and the needs of bankers, of billionaires, of the warmongers who want to continue accumulating profit through destruction. The people of Nicaragua have built socialism, have built peace, stability, which is what we all want. We all want a life where our children don't have to worry about dying from being bombed, where our women don't have to worry about being harassed, where everyone has the right to read and write and to learn, to study, to grow, to contribute, to unleash the human capacity within all of us, the potentials we have to grow. And that's why it's so important to really show Nicaragua the solidarity that it deserves. I want to say I stand in complete solidarity with my sisters and brothers in Cuba with their heroic 1959 Cuban Revolution. I stand in complete solidarity with our sisters and brothers in Venezuela with their 1999 Bolivarian Revolution. And I'm really glad that in the past few years, the solidarity movement has grown for these two countries. But this is a call for everybody who's on here, who's watching, who's listening. Don't forget about Nicaragua, because in 1979, there was a revolution in Nicaragua that was so transformative to not only Nicaragua, but to the world. that shows an example of the way out of this chaos. And unfortunately, because of propaganda, because of imperialism, because of the smear campaign against Comandante Daniel Ortega, because of the smear campaign against the Sandinistas, many of those who in the 70s and 80s were there in support of Nicaragua have retreated, have fallen for the lies of mainstream media. I'm calling on you to come back, show your solidarity with Nicaragua, show your solidarity with the women and men and children who are still fighting against the empire. There's still the fight going on today. And we can't forget about our sisters and brothers in Nicaragua, because the liberation of Nicaragua is the liberation of all people in the Americas and the world. And so I hope you enjoy this documentary with all humility. I hope you enjoy it. It's something that I worked hard on, and I really appreciate the ATC and the Sanctions Kill Coalition for allowing us to travel to Nicaragua to meet some of the most beautiful people I've met in my life in terms of personality and givingness and being so open and loving to all of us. I really appreciate what everyone on this panel has said so far. And I just want to make that appeal for those of us watching and listening. Please continue to support the Friends of the ATC. Please continue to support Sanctions Kill and continue to stand in solidarity with the people of Nicaragua against the empire, because the fight is still going on. It's not over. And we have to show support for our sisters and brothers in Nicaragua. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramiro, for that beautiful introduction to the documentary. I am just so happy that I was able to be in community with everybody here on this panel. Without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce now the international premiere of Nicaragua Against Empire. And I hope that everyone watching enjoys and shares and distributes. And la lucha continúa siempre. We will keep fighting. And as always, thank you, everybody.